Hello everybody. So this is the second video. I think this one's going to be like the statistics, and then the third video will be kind of my overall feeling about the trail. I'm doing laundry, so all my stuff's in storage, and I only have a certain number of clothes, so you're going to get the same black shirt as yesterday. But my hair is not as pretty as yesterday, so new day. Okay, so statistics, we'll do just a few things. This is essentially for all of the thru hikers or people interested in thru hiking or people who I guess like data. I don't think this is gonna be a long video, but I wanted to at least give some of my figures so that if somebody's interested in one approach before they hike the trail or before they hike the CDT or do any kind of a thru hike, then they can kind of get an understanding of what it takes on a daily basis, or at least what one approach takes on a daily basis. So I have I have everything on my computer here, so I'm going to be looking down a bit. I don't think I normally look at the camera a whole lot, so that's not a loss. Basically what I did was I ate something before I started this video, and now it's stuck in my throat, and I shouldn't have done that. So give me 1 second. Alrighty. I broke down the numbers into each state. So I have New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and then the Idaho-Montana section. And then I have some totals, and I also looked at the average or the mean per day, and I also looked at the, hey buddy, I also looked at the median. So the average is basically take all the numbers, divide it the number of days, and it gives you the average, but that can be skewed by like Nero days. Nero days, just as a reminder, are the days where you hike very little mileage. For my count, I use less than 10 miles as my Nero days. So if I hiked less than 10 miles, those are the Neros. Anything above 10 days, I included in the totals. And the median, again, as a reminder, is in the dead middle. So it doesn't get skewed as much by like low mileage days. And so the median looks like, okay, out of the days that you hiked, what is the actual middle of the road for, in this case, the miles hiked per day. I also broke out my mileage for the red line, and just as a reminder, the red line is the CDT proper. So in our navigation app, the red line or the CDT proper is shown as a red line, and people refer to it as a red line. And then I also broke out alternate, so I can give some information about that. And then I broke out not only hiking days and Nero days, but I also broke out my 0 days, so I can tell you how many zeros I took. So I'm going to do this by state first, and then I'll give you the totals. So for New Mexico, I had 29 hiking days to get across that state. It was, again, I was training at the beginning as I started, and so I think if you step on trail in shape, which I was not, then you could probably cut this down a little bit. But I had 29 hiking days, and I took 6 0 days, and those rest days, if I remember correctly, I had an extra out of Grant because I need to let my shin splints rest, and also we were planning to do the Shackleton alternate since they closed the Forest Service, the forest lands. And then I believe I had an extra day in Chama to, again, let my shin splints rest, so they didn't get worse, and I didn't have to step off trail. So for New Mexico, I had no Nero days. I hiked more than 10 miles every day when I hiked during the 29 days. And that was a total of 596 miles, a little over that. I'm not going to go into the decimal points. And I averaged, I won't go in decimal place for mileage, but I will for average. So I averaged 20.57 or 20.6 miles a day down in New Mexico. Again, if you step on trail in shape, I think you could definitely cut that down, or increase the miles per day and decrease the number of hiking days across New Mexico. This is a little skewed because, again, they closed meaning the National Forest Service closed the forest lands, and so we took the Shackleton alternate, or at least the folks I hiked with took it, and that actually cut some miles down. I think it took like 100 miles out of the overall total. So just keep in mind that my New Mexico is going to be missing about 100-ish miles because of the closure of the national forests. Okay, so Colorado. It took me 35 days to hike across Colorado for just hiking days. I did have 2 Nero days in Colorado, and then I had 6 0 days. So immediately you can see that I took more rest days in New Mexico. So I had 29 hiking days and 6 rest days. In Colorado, I had 35 hiking days, 2 Nero days, so 37 days of hiking, and then I had 6 rest days. So I was definitely hiking more in Colorado because I got my hiking shape on, and also I'm from Colorado, so I love the state. I've hiked across almost all of the trail before even hiking this trail, and so I was ready to go for Colorado. So if you exclude the Nero days, I averaged 21.3 miles a day for a total of 744 miles. If you add in the Nero days, it's about 760 miles, and the average actually drops down to 20.6 miles per day. This kind of stands out though, because usually when people hit Colorado, their mileage per day drops, and that's for many reasons. One, you're getting into high elevation, and if you are not coming from high elevation before the trail, then you're likely going to slow down because you got to get your lungs acclimated to the high elevation. Also, you're going from New Mexico, which is essentially flat, to suddenly going up 2 and 3 and sometimes 4,000 miles up the ascents. Excuse me, not miles. 2 to 3 to 4,000 feet up the ascent, and you're hitting 13ers and 14ers when you're hiking across Colorado. And so the fact that my average increased by about 0.7 of a mile per day is noticeable. I'm not surprised by this, just because, again, I used New Mexico to get into shape, and I live in Colorado. I've lived here for 18 years, so I was ready for the elevation, and I'm familiar with the ascents of Colorado. Okay, so Wyoming, I had 23 hiking days across Wyoming for a total of 528 miles. I had no Nero days, and I only had 4 rest days. So you can tell Colorado and Wyoming, I was playing catch up because I took so long in New Mexico. Not just the couple extra rest days, but also the fact that I was hiking lower mileage. So for Wyoming, that 528 miles, I actually averaged 22.97, so just round up 23 miles per day in Wyoming. That makes sense because of the Great Basin. Sorry, the dogs are walking all over the place. You might hear the click, click, click of their paws on the hardwood floor. But so Wyoming, that not only includes the Great Basin, which is entirely flat or mostly flat, but also it includes the winds and the cirque, which when you get to northern Wyoming, you are getting into elevation, but I was still averaging 23 miles a day. So you can see I was definitely playing catch up. I had no Nero days and only 4 rest days across Wyoming. Alrighty, so Idaho, Montana, I had 37 hiking days. I had 6 Nero days. I had 4 rest days. So again, you can see I'm racing to get to Canada with only 4 rest days. I did have more Neros, which was nice. So for the 37 hiking days, I hiked about 928 miles for an average of 25 miles a day, or 25.1 miles a day. If you include the Neros, I hiked a total of 964 miles across Idaho, Montana, and my average dropped down to 22.4 from 25.1. So the Neros definitely pulled that down because I had 6 of them, but I essentially was averaging 25 miles a day across Idaho, Montana. So in yesterday's video, I mentioned that I had some complainy pants about Idaho, Montana. Some of them are legit because of like the carpet of rocks across the trail. Some of them were because I had hiker's fatigue, but also, interestingly enough, the numbers point out that it was because I was running across Idaho, Montana, similar to running across Colorado and Wyoming. However, you can see that my mileage in New Mexico was 20.6 a day. I'm not going to include the Neros here. So 20.6 a day in New Mexico, up to 21.3 in Colorado, even with the elevation. Then I hit 23 miles a day in Wyoming with combination of flats and elevation. And then I got to Montana, which is a lot of elevation, and I was hitting 25.1 miles a day. And that essentially was, to get me to the border. The fact in Montana that I went around Butte and didn't take the Anaconda cutoff means that I had to hike 100 additional miles, or approximately 100 additional miles compared to what most people did, like 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10 hikers take Anaconda. So the fact that I needed to find those 100 miles, I found it in my average per day of 25.1. So the grand total for the entire trail, I hiked 124 days with 10 or more miles. That equated to 2,797 miles, and that was an average of 22.6 miles per day. If I add in the Neros, I had a total of 8 Neros for 52.5 miles. And so the grand total mileage was 2,849.4, so about 2,850 miles. I was hoping to get to 3,000 in this hike, but the closure of the national forest is most of the missing 150 miles. But I was able to hike more than the PCT, which is 2,660 when I hiked it, or 68, because you got to hike to the lodge in Canada. So I hiked more miles, so it was 2,849 miles. And the average without the Nero days ended up being about 22.5 miles per day. And including the Neros, it was 21.6 miles per day. So the rule of thumb when you're going to hike the CDT is you need to hike about 20 miles per day, and you'll make it before the winter hits Canada if you're going northbound. In my case, I trained while I was on the trail. I hiked 2,850-ish miles, and so I had to essentially hike 21.6 miles per day, including that includes the Neros, to get finished, or 22.6 if I didn't include the Neros. So I was hauling. It was an aggressive hike. That also, I think, explained some of the fatigue when I got to Idaho, Montana, was the fact that I was pressing so many miles per day, especially, averaging 25 miles by the time you hit Idaho, Montana. I think I would have much rather, like if it was a perfect situation, I would have much rather increased my mileage in New Mexico and Wyoming and been able to decrease my mileage in Montana, but that wasn't the case. So those are the means or the averages. Those are all in miles because I'm from the States. However, if I look at the median, so that's the middle. So instead of having the outliers, if I look at just the median itself, and I exclude the Neros because those are kind of outliers, since they're lower mileage than the average, I was at 22.5 miles, so it was pretty close to the mean, which was 22.6. If I include the Nero days, I was at 22.2 miles per day, which is again pretty close to the mean, which was 21.6. So looking at the mean and the median shows that there weren't a huge number of outliers. There was a little bit of a difference because the Nero days, but for the most part, I was hiking about 22 miles a day. If you include the Neros, it's 21.6, but you can round that up and round down without the Neros, and I'm looking at 22 miles a day was what I hiked, and that was over the course of 132 miles or 132 days. Hold on one second, the dogs are roughhousing. Hey Ruby, Bruce, Silly dogs. Okay, so just a few more statistics for you. Hey, fellas. Hey, how you folks doing? So I said that I looked at statistics for the red line versus alternates, and I did not take very many alternates. I can actually tell you the exact ones I took. For those who are interested in hiking the CDT, I did take the Gila alternate, which I think it takes off about 100 miles, something like that. But there's tons of water and it's absolutely beautiful. And I wanted, just as a reminder, the alternates I took, I wanted to make sure I wasn't avoiding something. I was going to see something, and I wanted to see the Gila because I heard that it was absolutely beautiful. In this year, because the snow melted so quickly in New Mexico, the high route, so there in the Gila alternate, there's two alternates. You can do the low route or the high route. And I started the high route, and the water report was basically stating that there was no water in the high route. So I would have had to carry a boatload of water in order to take the high route. So I took the high route for a little bit, and then I dipped back down to the low route using the Big Bear Trail. And mental note to myself, and if you're watching this because you're going to hike the trail, if you take the high route on the Gila alternate and you're going to take the Big Bear Trail to get back down to the low route, bring enough water to camp at the beginning of that Big Bear Trail, because when you cut off Big Bear, you're going to walk down to this it's not really a mesa, I'll call it like a flat rock formation, and there's a wonderful campsite on the left, and you get to look down into the valley down to the Gila River, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The sunset, because I was hiking there late in the day, so the sun was starting to set and it was beautiful. I'm assuming the sunrise would have been beautiful. I wish I had enough water to have camped there and then dive down to the lower Gila alternate, but I didn't. So if you are taking Big Bear Trail from the high route to the low route, bring enough water that the first day so you can camp up there, because it's absolutely beautiful, and you can tell some folks have camped there because there was a fire ring and some benches, like logs set up as benches, so you can tell that it's, for the locals especially, it's an area that people like to camp at, and I'm sure it's got beautiful sunrise and sunset. So I'm kind of sad I didn't get to do that. So the Gila alternate was one that I took. I had to do the Shackleton alternate, which, just as a reminder, is the alternate that was created to get around the forest closures. And Marty is the one who kind of spearheaded that, and then Dee and Mouse helped kind of do the fine adjustments, and then we hiked it. So the Shackleton alternate was another one I took. I did the side trip to the Molasse Lake as a reminder. That's where the Colorado Trail and the CDT intersect. You can go over to Molasse Lake and do a resupply. So I did an out and back. So that was a side trip, not really an alternate. I also did a Creed side trip. So after I passed Molasse, I dipped down into Creed to get another resupply. So the Creed alternate cuts off most of the San Juans. I just did the 10 miles reverse to get down into Creed to resupply, and then went back out. So I took the red line around the Weminuche, or the San Juans. All right, let's see here. I did the Argentine Spine. So the Argentine Spine alternate, you stay high on 13ers to get over to Argentine Pass, and then the peak itself, and then you go up the basically the spine of the 13ers and the 14ers on the way up to Gray's Peak. Gray's Peak is the 14er, so I took the Argentine Spine. I took the James Peak Ridge alternate. So when you get up to the top, you either dive back down and then go up James, or you can hike 5 13ers to get over to James, and I did that alternate, so I stayed on the ridge. So Rocky Mountain was not closed to through hikers, so I hiked through Rocky Mountain. A lot of the hikers in 2022 did not do so because of the burn area, but I did go through Rocky Mountain, which is the red line, so that's really not an alternate. I did the Cirque of the Towers alternate. I also did the Knapsack Coal alternate, and then sorry, I'm not including closures. There was a few fire closures. Oh yes, and then I did the Chief Mountain alternate. So I went around Butte, so I did not take the alternate around Butte. Through Anaconda, I actually went on the red line around Butte, but I did take the Chief Mountain alternate because of how late in the season I got to Glacier National Park. So I know that was kind of disorganized there, but that essentially were the main alternates that I took. I only had 541 miles of alternates, which means that I had 2,309-ish miles on the red line or the CDT proper. So I actually spent about 81% of my time on the CDT proper. That would have been more if the national forest in New Mexico weren't closed, which, let's see. So based on my math, the forest closures in New Mexico, I lost 156 miles. So that's essentially the 150 miles I needed to get to the 3,000 mark. But that's also 156 miles of the alternates. So if I had been able to take the red line, I would have had likely, high 80% of being on the red line. So the Gila alternate was about 102 miles. The Chakron alternate was 156. And the others were about 282. So that's like the Cirque and the Chief Mountain and the Knapsack Coal and a couple of other smaller ones. So essentially, I spent 81% of my time on the red line. I'm guessing that's probably high compared to most hikers, especially once you get to Idaho, Montana. A lot of people are taking shortcuts and alternates or cutoffs. They're not called shortcuts, they're called cutoffs. Okay, so just as a recap, I know I kind of rambled here towards the end, but I spent 81% of my time, or 2,309 miles, on the red line. I had about 541 miles on alternates, including the Gila, the Shackleton to get around the closures, and then like the Cirque, the Knapsack, Chief Mountain, that kind of stuff. And then, I averaged close to 22 miles a day. If you take out the Neros, it's 22.6 miles a day. So that's essentially the statistics for my trip. I got very lucky with fires. So that's the last thing I'll mention about the route that I took. The closures of the 3 national forests in New Mexico, those were prevention. There was not an actual fire in the national forests. So they did prevention for the fires, and that's why I had to hike around the 3 national forests. Looking in my list, again, Rocky Mountain was not closed, even though they were doing a cleanup for the fire that had happened there, but we could have hiked through it, so that wasn't closed. Okay, so my first fire encounter that the CDT was actually closed was in Idaho, Montana, according to my notes, and that's when I was right outside Wisdom, Montana, and the fire had come over the trail, and I hiked with Vista and her father to get around that section. So that was my first fire closure that I see in my notes. If I missed one, sorry, but that's the first one that I see here where I had to step off the CDT, like the red line, to get around it. And then the second one was further into Montana, and that was the Straight Creek. So this is right by the Benchmark Ranch, where the Ursus fire was going on, and instead of going up and over the pass, we just took the Straight Creek alternate, and I think it was only it's only a couple miles. It was like 6 miles or something like that, so it wasn't very much. That's it. I had 2 fire closures. I got through the Gila alternate before the fire closures. And Colorado was wet this year, so it didn't have fire closures that I'm aware of. As y'all know, I had a boatload of rain in Colorado and Wyoming, and it continued raining on me into Idaho, Montana. So that rescued me, I think, from fire closures. The fact that oh man, I didn't realize it was this small. So the fact that I just had to do that bushwhack in Montana, and then I had to do like 6 miles around the Ursus fire. So it's less than 10 miles of me having to step off for fires, which is extremely low for a CDT hike or any through hike in the States these days, especially in the Western United States. So yeah, that's looking at numbers, not thinking about memories, but just looking at numbers, it makes it seem so insignificant. It's like, oh yeah, I just hiked 2,849-ish miles, and I was averaging 22 miles a day, and not including 0 days, the whole trip took me 132 days to hike those 2,800 plus miles. A lot of memories though. So, all right, I'm going to end this thing because it went a bit long, and I thought I could get through this in about 15 to 18 minutes, and I'm about 8 minutes over. So if you're interested in data, there's your data. And if any friends or anything have questions, you can go ahead and email or text me, and I can answer those questions. But yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. One thing that I wanted to total was my number of 0 days. So the rule of thumb for a through hike, if you want to stay healthy, is you should have a 0 day for every 6 days of hiking. So once a week, you're getting a 0 day. In my case, I had 3 double zeros. Grant, New Mexico, Chama, New Mexico. Oh no, I had 4. Pagosa Springs, and those 3 were because of injury. So I had 3 extra days there because of injury. And then I had 1 in Wyoming, up in Pinedale, because I was disappearing, because I was losing so many calories because I was hiking monster miles according to these numbers, up and over, a bunch of stuff in Colorado elevation wise, and also in Wyoming. So if you take out 3 of my zeros for injury, that's 17. And so if I look at 132 hiking days, so that's hiking and Nero, and I divide it by 7, that tells me I should have about 19 rest days. And I had 20 rest days, including those 4 doubles that I just counted. If I remove the doubles, then that's 16. So I was right on pace to have a rest day every once a week, basically every 7 days. If you take out the 3 double zeros for injury, I'm at 17, which is about 2 days less than what I should have been. So the fact also that most of my rest days, so 12 of my rest days, came in Idaho, Montana, and New Mexico, and I had very little Nero. I had, between Colorado and Wyoming, I only had 2 Nero, and I had 10 rest days. As opposed to 12, 16 Nero or 0 days in Idaho, Montana, and New Mexico. So part of that is Idaho, Montana is longer mileage-wise, but part of that is also I didn't step on trail in shape in New Mexico. So just a little bit of information on those Neros and zeros in case injury happens. The fact that I only had to do 3 doubles for injury, and injury stayed away most of the other, for most part, on the rest of the hike, and that includes training, only doing 14 to 16 miles to begin with in New Mexico. I have no complaints, absolutely no complaints. I should have probably been much more injured than I was, but I wasn't. And I mean, my biggest concern was like the blisters and also my feet, and just making sure that they were all taken care of. But from my memory, like my knees, basically my knees on up, they were doing okay. I had some IT band kind of barking, but stretching took care of that. I had some shin splints, but stretching took care of that, and just making sure I had rested at the appropriate moment when my body was barking, and then just maintaining constant vigilance on the blisters. So yeah, that's for stepping on trail not in shape. The fact that I stayed pretty in line with my zeros, having one a week, that you can probably tell by just how I'm reacting that I didn't realize that. So that's pretty good. All right, I will end this time. Not like last time where I faked it, but like I said, if you have questions, just let me know. And those are the statistics. And one more video to basically just recap the entire hike and my thoughts on it, and then all wrapped up. So have a nice evening.